sometimes you can plan a session and have everything down to the little tiniest bit detail, and they come in and want to do something completely different. So it's really about working on your toes, going with the client's needs and the place that they are in at that moment. And traditionally, art therapy started sort of more based on the medical model. So there's the idea that art therapy is used to analyze art, like draw a picture and look at it and tell me exactly what it means and what's happened to this person. And it's really gotten away from that. It's more about the process of creating and allowing a person to find alternative ways of expressing themselves, and then paying attention to what's happening in the session and through the progression of sessions as to how you end up working with them and what direction you take. So art therapy, what can it do? Well, it acts as a safe bridge. You've got the client and you've got the therapist, and in traditional psychotherapy, you talk, blah, 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 blah. Some people don't feel comfortable with that. Some people say, you know, respond, how are you doing today? I'm fine. But that's sort of a blanket response sometimes, right? So you introduce a creative process, and the focus is then drawn away from the client, perhaps who's not feeling comfortable, and it's put onto the art, and the art piece becomes the topic of discussion. And from there, it can jump off to create conversation and planning and whatnot. It's a safe way to release intense emotions, such as fears, anger, sadness. I'll show you through the art some examples, but what I've got here is just the tip of the iceberg. You can, as I said, go in and have specific ideas, but then I quite often catch myself off guard because I'll suddenly come up, oh, well, how about we do something like this? Or the client comes up with that, and it's even more powerful and amazing. It helps to develop meaningful relationships. It gives individuals the opportunity to practice communication skills in alternate ways. It can be used in individual and group settings. And it supports individuals through grieving processes, through changes, through transitions. And I know that when we're working with individuals with disabilities, sometimes they need that kind of support. They're so they need those routines, and transitions can be very difficult. So art therapy can be a way to help them go through that transition in a little bit more of a smooth way. It promotes skill development, using art as a visual reminder to practice some of these skills and transfer it into their general community and into their different environments. And it allows the creative self to surface. It's amazing how many people think of art therapy as, oh, it's not something that I can't do art therapy. I don't have a creative bone in my body. You'd be amazed at how creative every single one of you could be, because we are just so used to our preconceived notions of what is art. And as I mentioned, it's not about creating an aesthetic piece, about making it beautiful and hanging it up on the wall. It's about how it feels to be doing it, what is revealed, what is expressed. And it can be a really amazing and exciting experience for people. The art therapist. I also actually, while I'm remembering, if you have any questions that come up, I want you to just say them while we go along, because it's probably easier to remember that way instead of sticking it in your thought box. So please do so if you have questions. So the art therapist. As an art therapist, I've gone through a master's level training, and I know that there are a lot of people who do use art in a therapeutic setting. And there are courses, for instance, at VIHA. Bruce Tobin is an art therapist, and he teaches an expressive therapies course. I do want to caution people, though, that taking a workshop or participating in a class doesn't mean that you are able to practice art therapy. You do have to go through specialized training, which is usually about 2.5 years long, master's level program. And in Victoria, there's a program here, there's one in Vancouver, and there's a new program that I was just mentioning through the University of, or I guess it's called Campus Alberta, which is a collaboration between University of Lethbridge, Calgary, and Athabasca. So it's working in conjunction with the Vancouver Art Therapy Institute, and you can get your master's in counseling with a specialization in art therapy, and you can do it through correspondence too. So it's an amazing profession. I love my job. So the art therapist is trained to observe the process, to look at the art, the form, the color, patterns, the interests that surface, the comments that the client might make, the body language of the client, whether they come in and, are very hesitant to do art, or they spill out and use tons and tons of paint and whatnot, the behaviors, and all the nonverbal expressions. The art therapist creates a safe place, a place of containment, because art is a very, very powerful tool, and it surprises people what comes out of it. So the art therapist is there to contain it. If I see something happening in a setting, in this session, I make sure that the client leaves feeling a sense of grounding, or that the team that works with the client or their caregivers or their home and support people know that this is an experience that happened for them, so that they can be mindful of the place that the client's in. And it's very important to make sure that they're not walking out, still raw and open. And the art therapist can support and encourage skill development, like I mentioned. You can practice things over and over and over repetitively, so that they gain confidence in their ability to do certain things. And it just opens up wonderful, wonderful ideas and ways of promoting self-esteem. And as I mentioned, working with a team to support the client and facilitate their growth. When I work with clients, I find it very, very important to work with everybody that they're involved with, to keep that open dialogue, because I have the opportunity to share 1 hour, typically a week, and they then go out and live the rest of their life. And it's just so important to have that open communication with everybody involved. All right, so why do people get referred to art therapy? Well, relationship problems. If someone is struggling with getting along with peers, knowing how to handle themselves in different situations, like a work setting, for instance. If they're struggling with family relationships, it's a great way to explore all the very complex issues that are involved in a relationship. I like to do art therapy myself at home, because everybody has difficulties sometimes with relationships. They're everywhere. So it's a great way, as I mentioned, the nonverbal aspect of art therapy, overcoming language barriers, people who have difficulties of expressing themselves, people who are not able to verbally speak. It becomes working about the piece, and it becomes about the art piece. It's a great way in supporting the expression of difficult emotions. So people who are struggling, say, with anger management issues and have tried different ways, this might be another supplement to help them to practice expressing themselves in safe ways. It's a safe place, as I mentioned, to explore all the intense thoughts, emotions, behaviors related to past and present life experiences. It's the opportunity to tell a story. You can support identified mental health issues, giving them ideas about how to deal with, for instance, depression, anxiety. Quite often we'll work, I don't just use art therapy in a setting. I will combine it with cognitive behavioral therapy, so they can have the opportunity to, say, have homework. I assign homework, and they quite often roll their eyes, don't give me homework. Yeah?
I'm just wondering if there's specific diagnostic categories that tend to benefit most from art therapy.
I think that it goes across the whole spectrum, really. In terms of, well, there are books on working with children with and adults and youth with pervasive developmental disorders, autism spectrum disorder, individuals who do have depression and mood disorders. Definitely. See, the thing with art is that it doesn't have really any barriers, so it can help cross those different areas and support people in different ways. So I think that's why it is in so many different settings, in hospitals, in specialized programs that do work with individuals with mental health disorders, young, old, people with terminal illness. It's everywhere, and I wouldn't say that there's necessarily, not that I'm aware of, more referrals to specific areas than not.
Is there adaptations that are done for people who have motor problems, like people with cerebral palsy?
Absolutely, yeah, and I can talk a bit about that. Another great thing about art therapy is the adaptation. You know, sometimes you have to think on your toes, like working, say, with small tiny beads might be difficult for someone with fine motor skills, so you have to, you know, think about, okay, well, maybe that's not the best medium to use. What would be something else that would work differently? Or, you know, using clay, making, you know, there's so many different things that you could do. The tactile sensitivity is huge as well, and I can show you some of that. Yeah?
Art therapists are also trained in more than just the drawing, which is a big thing. They're also trained in visualizations. They're trained in actually sculpting, training in a lot of areas. I had one client who was developmentally delayed, and he suffered an accident and became paraplegic. Now, how do you work with him in drawing, and painting, etc.? But I did find a way that really worked with him. And that was playing music and having him visualize, and we worked back what was happening. So we were doing pictures and stories anyway.
And you're right, as an art therapist, I was sort of almost expected to have my art therapy or visual arts background as well as background in psychology. And you know, you have to go through the therapeutic process yourself so you can understand what it's like being on the other side and knowing what works for you or what doesn't work for you. As if you're trained in that way or you have familiarity with a variety of materials, it's just going to further support the person that you're working in or with in finding ways to express themselves. Because, you know, as an artist myself, I can very easily get frustrated if something's not working out when I'm using a certain material. So if I have that understanding as an art therapist and I have the skill of trying to support them and find adaptations and ways that it's going to work for them, it's just going to further promote the success of their experience. So it's really important. And, you know, art therapy falls under the expressive arts therapy like umbrella. So there's drama therapy, there's music therapy, there's play therapy, and sometimes it's a mix and mingling of all of the, like everything. You know, if a client needs music on in the session just to help them feel a little bit more calm, or if it's something that they helps them through transitions, then by all means, do it. It's really flexible, and that is what makes it really exciting for me as an art therapist to use it as a tool, for sure. Mentioned coping with loss and life change for our older clients, for adults who maybe have disabilities, who are, say, moving from their parents' home into independent living, or changing group home environments, or who are losing family members. It's an amazing opportunity for them to work through that grieving process in a way that might be familiar with them, in a way that can be very supportive. And life crises as well. We all have them, and sometimes it's great to have ways to release that. Support and understanding sexual development and other issues. Very difficult topic to talk about. I work with it every day with children and youth, but it doesn't, stop at that. It can go into adulthood as well. Something that tends to be very secretive, that people don't necessarily know what their rights are, and can't necessarily express them. So it's a great way to visually help them to learn and to understand what their rights are, what their needs are, what's happening to them, all the changes that occur, and other issues as well. It doesn't have to be just that issue. It can be anything that they're struggling with. And the personal development and self-esteem. It's incredible how, you put clay, for instance, in front of a person who's never ever used it before. They might say, oh, I can't do it, or they might not know what to do with it. You work with it, and they create this amazing piece that they're very proud of, and you can see them beaming sometimes, just gushing with pride about what they've created, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to watch and to be a witness to. Okay, so I've kind of designed it, so I'm going to walk through some different areas. So the first one is self-esteem, confidence, and discovery. And I'm just going to make sure I follow my notes. Okay, so in the art therapy setting, a client can be promoted to make their own decisions, decide whether or not they're going to use watercolor or clay or crayons or collage. And so in that way it promotes the choice making, and they can take responsibility for what they create in a session. And they can also take responsibility for quite often what they choose to share verbally with you, and how deep they want to go. And so it does allow that control. And for many people whose lives maybe are directed and supported by so many other people, what a great opportunity for them to practice this skill and to feel like they have control over making some decisions for themselves. In art therapy, there's no rights or wrongs. I always say that's one of the very first things I say to the people that I work with as soon as they come in. It's not your teacher. I'm not going to mark your art. I'm not going to say cows can't be purple. I'm not going to tell you that you have to do it this way. This is your opportunity to explore, to experiment, to have fun. And oh, yay, it's wonderful. And if you do make a mistake, that's awesome. Let's make, all of our art has to have at least 3 mistakes in it today. Or today we're going to make the ugliest painting ever, as ugly as you can imagine. And then after it's done, you hold it up, or you put it on the wall, and then you look at the things that you like about it. And well, what makes this, we worked on making the ugliest thing, but look at this part, and look at that part, and wow, this is actually a work of art, and it's amazing, And things like, using, if there's a whole bunch of paint and they've squirted tons of paint onto the palette, let's challenge. Let's see if we can do our best to get rid of all that paint and to make prints. And so you end up, quite often we have to tippy-toe around, or there's art all over the office because they've just created so many masterpieces, and it's really exciting for them to see how productive they can be. Self-mastery, that whole idea of trying a new material or a new medium and practicing and gaining skill in using it and making mistakes but continuing and not giving up with that kind of thing. The sense of freedom of expression. You can talk about or paint about or do anything that you need to do, and sometimes there can be resistance, but once they get into that process of creating, then it's amazing what comes out, you know, and it surprises them, it surprises me, but that freedom to say what they need to say, to, you know, write things down or to draw it out when they've never ever been able to do it before, to talk about it or to even put it out visually. The mastery of new materials, the confidence building, and just the sense of pride. And what I do with the art in the setting is, because some of it can be very emotionally charged, I keep it until the whole process of the counseling is completed, because that way the client knows that it's safe, it's being respected, and I know that it's not going to, say, go back to their home and be destroyed, or, you know, just be put in a drawer. Until that process is completed, it's there, we can put it out afterwards and reflect back on certain things, and it's just contained. And that's really important, I think, for a lot of clients, to know that their art's being respected. So, self-esteem. These are two self-portraits that were created, and two different materials, both individuals with disabilities. And so this one here was the smelly markers. You know those Etch-a-Sketch things? They're so wonderful. I love them. Half the time we just end up smelling and talking about the memories that those smells are attached to. It's really wonderful, because then so many stories come out, and then you can, well, draw a picture of it. Draw a picture of that memory, and you can just jump off and do incredible things. So this was done by actually a young teen, self-portrait, and she explained to me that all the dots, someone had had chickenpox recently in her life, and so she was imagining what that would be like. So it's quite interesting. And she's also experimenting with makeup. So she was very interested in what it would look like and what it would be like for her to wear makeup. So what a great way to try that out, to draw it out and play. And over here, again, a self-portrait, totally different medium, but also, you know, this boy, he had also a teen, but he had attention deficit as well, so he was just like, oh, and he actually really needed to be slowed down. And the process of creating art can really facilitate that. You can practice using the clay before you get into the process, so you can, you know, get them used to the texture of it. For many people, there are sensitivities, and that's one adaptation. Have gloves available, so that if there is that sensitivity to a certain textile or whatever, you can actually be aware of that. And so you can see this was done right directly on the desk, which made it difficult, and which, you know, we had to discuss what was going to happen to the art, because it wasn't going to be something that I was going to be able to actually lift up and save for the client. So we did take a picture of it, and I think he actually went on to recreate another self-portrait, but this time he made the choice to use a piece of wood that I had available at this time, but he actually then wanted to keep it, and we were able to recreate it in a way that was going to be more successful in terms of firing it. And that's a whole learning process too, giving them information and knowledge about how to create sculptures and the steps that they would need to, you know, have it not explode in the kiln, which is very, very disappointing, right? But we do have those discussions, and what would it be like if it did explode? How would you react? How it would make you feel? What would you know, what could we do about it? So it's great problem solving. Self-esteem flower, an exercise that quite often can be used for individuals who are struggling with, you know, what do I like about myself? You know, nobody likes me at my home that I live at, or I'm really having difficulties out at my workplace. So getting them to identify for themselves what they like about themselves. So the idea in this case was put images around your self-esteem flower of things that you were proud of yourself for. So for instance, is it Jude Law? It was, I was proud that I'm moving on and that I'm positive about myself. The one with the coffin up there, this young man was struggling with a lot of pressures from his peers to engage in the use of drugs. And so he chose that symbol, which is so powerful. You know, he's saying, I'm proud of myself that I am not doing these drugs, and that I'm, you know, I've got enough power to say no. And what I did with this man, why we used collage, was because he didn't have the ability to write. And so how I was adaptive in that was that I would write his words down. He would pick symbols that he would recognize and that were powerful and associated to what he was speaking about, so that later when he looked at this self-esteem flower, he would be able to recall, because of the visual cue, what he had worked on and what he was proud of himself for. And the stem, which isn't shown here, we also get them to identify what supports they have, what holds the flower up, what supports do they have within their community, within their home, within, you know, at their school or work setting, all these different places. And then we also get them to do the root system underneath the ground, and those are self-help and self-care skills, things that they can do for themselves that, you know, just further help to hold them up and to promote, you know, self-pride and confidence in themselves. It can be tiny, tiny little things like, you know, having a cup of tea, or taking time to watch their favorite television program, or whatever it is. Everybody has different ideas because everybody's so individual. So there's a close-up. I'm proud that I'm moving on from my messed up past, that one was. And you know, he's proud. That face is a proud face. This one, I'm proud of myself for trying to do my best in courses, and I work hard. So he chose an image of someone doing art, and as a representation of trying hard. He didn't like doing art that much. And so that's something that I had to be mindful of. He was a big talker. And this client had fetal alcohol and fetal myelin disorder, I believe is what it's called. His mother had used epileptic medication when she was pregnant, as well as street drugs. So he had difficulties with you know, setting limits and recognizing social cues and dealing with consequences and whatnot. So, communication. This is all shifted. The N wasn't down there when I... That's okay, as long as you guys are okay with it.
There's no mistake.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, the image as a non-verbal communicator, it becomes a channel for the therapist and the client to express what's happening for them. If a client has language impairments, it comes out in the art. And that's another reason why working with the people that are in their lives is so important, so that you know what's happening for them. For instance, I was working with a client once, and again, I had the whole session planned out, and I was really excited about it. And she came in and told me that her cat was dead. That they had to take it to the vet, and the cat had died, and she was very upset about it. So we worked on her dead cat, and we planned a little bit of a sort of service that she could have for it, and how she was feeling, and what it was like to lose something that you really cared about. I didn't have the opportunity to speak with anyone that she was working with, and found out that the cat wasn't dead, that he had just gone for his shots. But but that's how the child, like that's how they, you know, perceived it. Was the cat had gone to the vet, and that was just like, oh my goodness, when the cat goes, it must mean that it's, you know, dead. So it really it speaks to how important it is to stay in touch with people. Utilization of symbols and metaphor, like I was showing you on the self-esteem flower. You know, powerful images that can represent what the client means and what their perceptions are. And a lot of the art that's created can be representational. For instance, if you're using collage, but it can also be extremely abstract. It can be the use of, like, what color is anger for you? You know, some people might say black, some people might say red, but it's going to be different for everybody, right? And you know, even down to, what does anger look like? What does sadness look like? I've had clients who have difficulty differentiating between the two, so they appear the same visually. And that's a really amazing thing to discover, because then you can kind of work with them to help them understand the difference. And you can also pass that information on to the people in their lives, so that they're not getting confused and they can better support the individual. The articulation of life experiences through visual representation. You know, telling stories that they've never been able to share with anyone. Expressing things that they thought they were never allowed to express. It's unbelievable the things that do come out visually, the stories that they want to share, that they need to share. The art piece as a vehicle for conversation. You know, sometimes they might come in and not know what they want to talk about, and so we just get down to creating, and then through the process we might just start talking about something that's completely unrelated to the artwork that they're working on, but that's very important at that moment for them to speak about. And sometimes I've been in sessions where we just sit and don't say anything, and it's really uncomfortable for a little bit until you realize that that's exactly what they need. They just need to be in the space. Sometimes it's a limit testing thing, you know, how much is she going to put up with? Is she going to, like, send me home, or, you know, what can I get away with, or what, you know, is she going to give up on me, or whatever. Like, who knows what people are trying to say when they do certain things, but it's really important to create that containment and to give them the opportunity to do what they need to do. Unraveling conflicts, like between thoughts and feelings. I had a client once who was just feeling so overwhelmed by all of their experiences that they weren't quite sure how to express what was happening. And I believe that, yeah. So this was what he drew. So this was his body, his head predominantly, and his brain. All these different things were what was going on. You look at that, you imagine it in your brain, and it's like, whoa, oh my goodness, how do you deal with that? And for individuals who may not have the capacity to understand what's going on, to have the skills of knowing how to deal with some of these things, and people who might just very easily get triggered and overwhelmed when they have so many thoughts bouncing around, that can be a really, really scary place for them. So then he went and drew this image, and this became his metaphor. it blew me away. He described it as a gymnasium with, if you imagine this room, and he's drawn it right here, with springs everywhere. And it was like a ball just bouncing back and forth, and it couldn't stop. And it was making him feel overwhelmed. And when he explained that when he felt in that place, he couldn't focus. He couldn't, control his emotions. He would get really, really agitated very, very quickly. And then he would become aggressive. And so once he was able to identify this type of metaphor and some of the thoughts and the things that were stressing him out, what some of the springs were and how they were causing all this discombobulation, he was able to go, okay, let's focus on one of these little things and gain control over it, develop like a locking system so it's not going to bounce, something like that. And you can just go from there. It's really powerful. So these were a few of what he had identified as issues. So the first one is his disability. He was very frustrated. He felt very easily judged by people. He felt like he wasn't given the opportunity to get to know a person because they would be like, I don't want to deal with you, or you have disabilities. He was teased. He really, really struggled with it. And when he was cooking, he wanted so much to be able to cook independently and to do it so that he could, create a meal for his mom. But then he would become very, very frustrated, especially when he's got all these other things going on in his brain. He wasn't able to step back and know how to calm himself down so that he could then go on and successfully cook. So it started to become something that just snowballed and created more and more bouncing around. And he had a lot of issues with his brothers who didn't have disabilities, who teased him, who took advantage of him, and they would freak out at him. These are his words, when he would make mistakes, and they just weren't supportive. So working through the visual arts, and the art therapy to help him to come up with some ideas about how he could deal with those kinds of situations. Emotional expression and safe release. So, visually you can help someone to expand on their emotional vocabulary. It's mad, sad, glad, happy, and sometimes we all get stuck using certain words, and so helping them to understand that there are lots of ways that they can express themselves emotionally. The nonverbal expression, getting it out when you can't say it. Helping them to look at emotional regulation. What do they do when they're feeling out of control? How can they practice it when they're in the community? If they create an image and they take that image with them, or they take it home either physically or they keep it in their head, that can be a thought process that comes up and can help them to think about what they discussed in the therapeutic setting and then try to implement and practice it. Unravel double dip situations. How can I feel angry and happy at the same time? Well, it's quite easy to feel that way, and sometimes you feel even more feelings than that. So unraveling that and giving them permission that that's okay, and allowing themselves to accept that they are going to feel certain things in different situations, and it might vacillate back and forth. And so how do they feel about it? What do they think? What have they done that's been successful in helping them to get through that process before? And identifying complex emotions in complicated situations. The grieving process, for instance. How are they going to move along that grieving path and understand that it's going to go back and forth? So sometimes they're going to be in denial. Sometimes they might have feelings, but they're not sure what it is. Is it anger? Is it sadness? It can be a lot of different things. So these images right here, looking at the feeling word, but then getting them to show what it would look like visually for someone on their face. Quite often we'll create a whole slew of these cards. They're usually about this big, and then we play a game. And so you draw it out. For individuals who maybe can't read, you look and, well, what does that feeling look like? Can you show me on your face? What does it feel like in your body? Can you tell me a time that you've felt that you've had a situation where you felt that emotion? And you can do it in a group setting so that they can understand what other people, how it might look different for different people.
Did it's one person draw this picture?
Yes, that was one person. That was.
What strikes me is that the colors are picked so precisely, because angry is red.
Mm-hmm.
It's really blue, and sad is kind of, the expression, I'm feeling blue, right?
Yep, yep.
So it's just, it's really unbelievable. And then happy is a bright, nice yellow.
Mm-hmm.
So
and these were colors that he specifically chose. Like I said to him, when you feel sad, do you think of a certain color? And he grabbed the color and then drew that. Yeah, so sometimes that's where the art therapist can direct a little bit or help them to explore different areas. So you're not just talking about the feeling, you're getting them to be aware in their body about how it makes their body feel. You're getting them to address how other people might show their emotions. Yeah. Anger Mountain. My friend last summer asked me, I was visiting her, and she's like, you need to teach me this Anger Mountain thing that you keep talking about. So this is, again, an art therapeutic exercise that quite often I will use, and it's a way of helping people to identify what makes them feel angry. Sometimes it happens so quickly that they just go to the top of the mountain and they like that. And so if we start to discuss with them and explore, well, what makes you feel angry? We can do visual images of times when that has happened for them. We talk about what does it feel like losing control. And again, up at the top, you can see that X, the red X. That was this client's way of picking a symbol so that he could remember that meant that when he's up at the top of his anger mountain, he's not thinking clearly. So it's a brain that he's crossed out, which is pretty neat. And so identified what happens when he is feeling out of control and his anger takes over. And then afterwards, what happens when you're on the other side? When you've ripped apart something that you have, or you've yelled at one of your best friends, or you've said words that you didn't feel comfortable saying, or you've become aggressive, violent, anything. How do you feel afterwards? And then the idea is that we then explore shortcuts. We dig tunnels through the mountain so that you can maintain control without losing it, and you feel good about the choices that you make. So it could be, taking deep breaths. It could be going to your room, going out for a walk, having a nap, having a cup of tea, talking it out with a support worker or one of your housemates. It can be any of those things. Again, this is a close-up of some of the things. Recognizing how you lose control. There's knowledge and power, or power and knowledge. So if they know that, and they know that this is how their body starts to feel and this is what happens, well then let's step back, let's, plan how we're going to deal with this kind of thing. And again, you can see little tools. Feeling like hell, my head's pumping, my head's going to explode, I get teary, I lose privileges, and people might not feel safe. These are things that happen afterwards. And feeling disappointed. So I would write those. This client had limited capabilities in reading and whatnot, so that he wrote up here, and it was shit. Oh shit. Swearing, not thinking, clouded over.
Almost identical.
Yeah. This is the young man with fetal alcohol. Yeah. Again, becoming aware of your body. You know, if you know where it happens for you when you start to feel angry, you can start to pay attention to your body and read the signs. So this individual indicated that in his hands, in his mouth, he swears. He gets, you know, verbal and loses control that way. And in his head, it's the representation of his head feeling like shit and exploding. You know, these are all these things that he identified as, you know, what was happening for him. So again, a safe and acceptable release for something that might not in, you know, society be deemed as appropriate. How can he then use art in the therapeutic setting to release that so that he doesn't actually release it in a home environment or a community environment? So this was an image of different things. He was really, really angry about something that had happened in his life, and he has all these images. He explained it as images that just take control, and he is worried that he's going to act on it. And so instead of acting on it, he can draw about it, and then we can do some calming, relaxation things. We can do some visualizations, and it sort of is a safe release. So a lot of this is self-explanatory. Well, for the one up on the top left corner, setting fire to someone. These are things that he wanted to do the person. Strangling him, hanging him in a basketball net, and punching him.
Do you have the same legality that you would have to break confidentiality or client privilege, or like if you saw something, does there have to be a method and a motive and the means to do so, or what are the parameters on that?
If you are worried about the safety of the client or the safety of an individual, then you're obligated, as you would be in sexual abuse cases and whatnot, to break.
If it's not verbalized, even if it's just portrayed in art.
You know what? I knew this client quite well. We had worked together for a really prolonged period of time, and so I knew that this was something that was just, he felt like he was going to do, but we discussed it a lot, and we knew that he wasn't going to follow through with it.
Legally, could you be held responsible if you did?
Probably, yeah. I'm just aware of the time, so I'm going to go through really quickly. Oh, see, that's upside down, mistake. Again, this was an image that he had in his head that he was worried about. It's, you know, a knife and a skull, and he was worried about these images. He was worried that he was going psychotic, and so this was his way of expressing some of that. So body image and self-care, using the art therapy setting as a way to discuss hygiene and self-care, the things that you need to do to make you yourself safe, keep yourself healthy. So, you know, I worked with the client to draw some of these images. Sometimes I do that, sometimes it's just them doing all the art themselves. This is, you know, an image of a client and the things that he is going to do, primarily food. Bananas and fruit, and oh, and up there the little top thing at the blue thing, deodorant. He struggled with, you know, getting into that pattern, into that habit. Understanding boundaries, huge. And I know that you probably talked a little bit about boundaries this morning. Was that brought up at all in the counseling? Anyways, this is a circles program that I modify with the clients. Usually there's the personal private space, the close hug, far away hug, wave, I call it high five, and then stranger. We label it stranger danger because it's not always a stranger that puts you in a dangerous situation. Modifying it according to the abilities of the client, and then having them put individuals into what circle they belong in. And I use it on separate pieces of paper because these people move. If they break trust, then they don't belong in your close hug circle. You move them out, right?
Can you just identify each of the circles again?
There's the purple private, the blue hug, the green far away hug, the yellow handshake hug, yellow handshake, orange wave, and red stranger danger. Identifying no feelings and no touches, very important in empowering and teaching rights to clients, right? If they're not sure what their rights are, how are they going to advocate for themselves? So, but identifying what they feel comfortable or don't feel comfortable with, because everybody is different. Tickling for one person might be okay. The other person, they don't like that. They don't like that kind of touch and that close physical proximity. So identifying that and helping the clients to really be aware of those things. And we talk about no feelings and no touches at the same time, because no feelings are the feelings that we don't like, the things that we don't want to, feel all the time, that make us feel like we want to withdraw. This is good touches or yes feelings. So hugs, masturbation, pat on the back. Again, this was a young man who was really working with trying to figure out what was okay and what wasn't okay, and where do we do certain things. Masturbation is a private thing. It's a great feeling, but it's somewhere there's limitations about where you do it, and so we can work again through the art to identify those places. Dealing with peer pressure, what are identifying for the client what those peer pressure is to that person. Brother pressure, again, this is that young man who is having a lot of difficulties with his brother, and so how do we deal with this? So he identifies it, and then we go on from there to process it and to problem solve. Problem solving. I'm motoring. I have 1 minute. So you can create visual solutions. Identify and then move on, and work through problems. And you can do it repetitively too. For a lot of the clients that we work with, we know that they need repetitive exposure, and that they need the opportunity to practice, so they can do that visually in the safe environment of an art therapy setting. Taking the practice runs, what would it be like if you did this in like your work setting? What would it be like if you practiced this at the group home or at the art studio or wherever they may be? They can use the art. It's tangible, it's there. If they need reminders, they can look at it and review it and recall it. And they can work in partnerships. If it is an art therapy setting where you're working with other people, then you can do role playing. And you can practice, maybe one person has one idea and the other person has expressed visually another idea. Practice them both with each other. And designing visual reminders. I worked with a client once who had an emergency list of telephone numbers. He could recognize the numbers but not the names, and so he decided on symbols, and that's how he identified whose number it was, put it in his wallet, and when he was out in the community on his own and he was feeling disoriented or distressed, he would then pull that out and know, because of the symbol that he chose, whose number it was. So, problem solving, again, the young man with fetal alcohol syndrome, he, what are your options? So if someone gives you the finger and starts swearing at you, you walk away. And if someone's yelling at you, there it again, you walk away again. So different ways of demonstrating a similar thing, but repetitive. Identifying a safe place, You've got here mushrooms, pot leaf and little pills with a big no. This is a safe place where none of that happens. I don't have to worry about that. I can use my wits, and there's peace. Peace in the home. And wits are walk away, ignore, talk it out, or seek help. Different options that you can use. This is sort of how he wants to be and how sometimes he thinks other people might perceive him. You know, in the work, I think this was talking about what it was like for him in the workplace. So he thought that sometimes people saw him as not doing enough work and showing attitude. He had a little bit of a gangsta thing going on. And so he would quite often, you know, cross some barriers that people didn't really feel comfortable about. And so we identified, well, who do you want people to see you as, and who are you? And you know, he was able to again identify all the things that he was really proud of himself, that he knew he was at his core. Problem solving, you know, what were some of the issues in his life? What were the things that he could do, and what were his directions in the future? So his, you know, the fact that he couldn't read really, really bothered him, because he wanted to, you know, he had a lot of career ideas, quite often would change every week, but he was definitely motivated, so he wanted to really know how to get to that path, and so we would identify some of the things that he could do. No fighting, again, problem-solving ideas. Making good choices, so a lot of visual reminders for himself. He could put this up in his room. Tool belt of skills, things he can pull out when he needs them. So he had an imaginary tool belt that he would say, okay, I can take 10 deep breaths, and I can talk to a counselor, and I can try not to engage in arguing, because I do that a lot. So this is a problem. What else can I do? Try to listen and use my words and tell people how I feel. Walk away, ignore, take a break. Relationship development. Can I keep going? Or I'm over 2 more minutes, okay. So relationship development, both individual or group. We've spoken about how the art acts as a go-between. The practice runs, and just the development of the relationship between the client and the therapist can be a way to practice that in your other relationships in your life. In a group setting, your own self-awareness, recognizing how other people express themselves, how they feel, practicing, and the back and forth thing. I'll get to the art. Well, this is explorations. Here, I'm just gonna, it's upside down again. So this here is a tent. Imagine a tent. This was a dream, like doing dream work. If a client comes and they're feeling, you know, distressed about a dream, or they had a really exciting dream and they wanted to portray that. The other one is, you know, imagine through a visualization a safe place, somewhere that you would, you know, can go to in your imagination to calm down. The beach, right? This is portraying a wish. This was a younger boy who had VIHA disease, and so he was very much affected physically by his disease, and had been through tons and tons of surgery. His wish for the future was to go shopping at the Rideau Center in Ottawa. It was like, oh, this, and to go to a beach, a tropical beach. There we go. So some resources if you do want to refer. You can always go on to the British Art Therapy Association has a website, and there's a huge directory, and so you can look at that. There's also the British Columbia School of Art Therapy here in town, and then the Canadian Art Therapy Association. So, and just, I think we're going to have a little sign-up sheet. If you do want a copy of this, I'm going to forward it to Marianne through email, and if you clearly write your email address on a piece of paper, then we can forward it to you if you're interested. Okay? So, thank you.